My name is Trevor Lecka, and I am Dubsado's product education lead. So today's webinar is going to be all about how to get paid like a pro using Dubsado. Now, this is sort of an evergreen topic, I think, where folks are obviously always needing to get paid somehow, some way if you're running a small business. And it's probably one of the most important things to get right in a small business, right? If you are not collecting funds from your clients, it's going to be difficult to maintain your small business for long, right? But I think now is especially a pertinent time to talk about invoicing in Dubsado, especially because Dubsado payments powered by Stripe has been around for a little while now, and we have been doing our very dangest to build out more and more features into it as we've gone along here. And it's a good spot to kind of take a little temperature check and make sure that folks understand all the different ways they can benefit from using Dubsado payments. But before we even get to accepting that payment, there's a lot of folks who are relatively new to Dubsado who I think need some guidance and would love to see a bit more information about all the different ways you can go about invoicing in Dubsado. So we're going to be covering a lot of different topics here today, kind of starting from the basics, right? Maybe a little bit more new user friendly, right? We're going to be talking about creating package templates and creating payment plan templates just a little bit, and talking about how we can usually use those templates to easily create invoices manually if we wish to do so, and then send those to our clients, right? We'll also be talking about how we can enable autopay if we need to enable autopay. We want our clients to enroll in autopay for that matter. Or, right, if you're someone who doesn't want to use autopay, you can set up automatic payment reminders so that you don't have to worry about your clients forgetting about a payment. Once we kind of get through those pieces, we'll take a brief little bit of time to look at how we can automate a lot of that process using a proposal, right? Which is something that a lot of Dubsado users like to do. Once we kind of have an invoice in hand, then we'll jump into the Dubsado payments end of things, where we're actually going to look at all the different payment options available to us at this moment in time, including things like surcharging and buy now, pay later options, Affirm and Klarna. Once we kind of get through all that, I do want to take some time to demo our brand new feature. Came out just yesterday, Tap to Pay on the mobile app. So I'm actually going to do the cool little iPhone share thing, and I'll show you guys my phone screen, and we can actually walk through how to set up Tap to Pay. Mine's already set up, but I'll walk you through how to do that. It's relatively straightforward, as well as the different ways you can initiate a Tap to Pay payment. I have a cool little video to show you all on that piece as well. So a lot of stuff to cover today. I hope you all are buckled up. You got your coffee, hopefully not too sleepy, Joanna. I get your coffee, and you're ready to pay attention here and hopefully learn something about Dubsado if you didn't already know how to invoice and things in Dubsado. So while I'm speaking, I'm just going to be doing a live demo in my account. I would encourage anybody with questions to throw those right there in the chat, myself or Joey, like I mentioned earlier. Joey's in the chat here to help answer questions as well. If I don't get to your question, don't worry. I will definitely do my best to double back and take a look at your question as well. You can also feel free to throw those questions in the Q&A. That can be a little bit easier for me to see questions that are kind of backed up. In the past, I've done not a great job of keeping my train of thought, since there's been so many good questions, and I really appreciate all the questions, folks. So do not hesitate to ask your questions. If I don't get to it immediately, I'm going to do my very best to double back to it, all right? But I appreciate everyone's time, and I appreciate everyone's questions. Cool. Enough of me yapping here. Let's go ahead and start screen sharing, and we'll get into it. All right. If anybody cannot see my mouse moving around on this packages page, let me know. Joe, we're all good here? Fantastic. Thanks, Christian. Cool. Okay, so like I said, we're going to kind of start at what I would call the top, right? If we're going to be talking about invoicing, I think we need to understand some of our building blocks before we kind of get into things here. So obviously in Dubsado being a template-based system, we can template out packages, which is what we call them, for our services. And hopefully you have maybe some base services that you frequently offer clients. Now, of course, this is not going to apply to everybody. I know a lot of folks who use Dubsado have very bespoke services they offer their clients, so they're going to change every single time. But I wanted to take a moment to at least kind of impress upon you that even if that's you and you have really specific services for your clients, it can still make sense to make package templates for some of the common denominator things, because it makes creating invoices so much easier down the line. So what I have here in front of us in my demo account, I just have a web design business that I've built out, and I have things like a starter, a premier, and an elite package, right? Now I can actually click into the gear icon to take a little a little closer look at the information that I have in these packages. So I gave it a name, right? This is just my starter. If I have a starter, premier, and elite package, I can have a description. I can even add an income category, which can help me keep track of income later down the road in my bookkeeping in Dubsado. But obviously I have a price and that sort of thing as well. So if I wanted to actually make a brand new package, I could go ahead and say add a package, and I can add in all those information, all those little details right here. I can give it a name. I can add that name into the item name right here, and I can go through and add in all my information. And like I said, the idea here is if you have services that you're constantly offering your clients, you have maybe a slew of services that you want to let your clients pick from, packages are really an ideal place to start, right? Having this information saved as a package will allow you to add it to that invoice very easily, or as we'll see in a little bit, add it to a proposal as well. If there's questions more specifically about how packages operate, I'm happy to answer those, but I really just wanted to call out the fact that packages exist because we're going to be using them very shortly here. Like I said, back in my package templates area here, I've already taken some time and built out some templates that we're going to be using in just a moment here. I also have things like add-ons, right? Just because you have additional services that maybe you don't offer all of your clients doesn't mean you can't package template those out as well. So I've got things like mobile optimization, logo design, website maintenance, that sort of thing. Anything that you've offered to your clients more than once, I would say, should be a package in your account. And I only have a handful here, but I've seen folks with a ton of packages, and that's totally fine. Anytime you make a package, you're going to be saving yourself time down the road because once I've made it once here, I can use it across the system anywhere that I like. Aaliyah asks, do you have recurring packages for monthly packages? Great question. So we're not going to talk too much about recurring invoices today. However, when I'm making packages, I can certainly apply those to recurring invoices just the same way that I can apply them to a normal invoice. So these packages that I'm looking at here are not specific to, one-time services or recurring services. They can be either or, Aaliyah, and that's a great question. Like I said, these packages are sort of, what would be the best way to put it? Multi-use, let's put it that way, right? You can use them on your proposals, you can use them on your normal invoices, you can use them on your recurring invoices, you can use them anywhere in the system that allows you to create an invoice. You can even use them on a scheduler template with an included invoice if you wanted to, right? Anywhere you like, these package templates are going to be good to go. So the idea with our package templates, we're going to kind of take that same exact concept, and the same thing exactly would apply to our payment plans, because that's kind of the other half of it, right? Packages being, hey, this is my service. I have a description of my service. I have a price for my service. But on the other end of things, you might be thinking, okay, great. I have in this case, maybe I have my starter plan or my starter package, right, for $1,500. I'm guessing most of your clients aren't going to want to pay $1,500 right up front. Now, of course, they might, but using payment plans, we can template out how we would prefer to allow our clients to split that payment up over the course of as many installments as we like. I have some questions here. Good question, Marissa. Marissa has a keen eye, and she noticed that I just had some blank packages in here to help me delineate whether they were my main packages or my add-ons. That's just a little bit of aesthetic flair that I added for myself. This is simply a $0 package that I called web design packages. It has nothing in here. It's completely blank. That's just so that I can have a nice header, though, that says web design packages with my main packages, then my add-ons. Of course, feel free to do that. And you can certainly drag and drop in this area as well, so you can keep your area nice and organized. Exactly right, Marissa. Exactly. Cool. Katrina says she has an issue with recurring invoices on autopay. Like I said, Katrina, we have a lot of topics to cover today, so we're not going to talk too much about recurring invoices, but I would encourage you definitely to go ahead and send us a chat using the little green bubble down here, and we can definitely help you out with doing that because using a recurring invoice with autopay is certainly possible. It's very doable. Cool. All right, so like I said, we're going to jump over to payment plans and look at this real briefly. I have some existing payment plans in here. And like I said, the concepts are the same, right? I'm going to think to myself, generally speaking, what kind of different installments do I want to offer my clients, right? And of course, you might have a conversation with your clients and determine a very bespoke, solution for that person that may not fall into one of your preset payment plans. And that's also totally okay. The idea being, if you're frequently offering at least one of your clients one kind of installments offering, right? Maybe you're like, okay, I want to offer 3 installments. And the next person's like, yeah, 3 installments sounds good. At that point, you should already have a payment plan template in there, so you don't have to keep recreating it manually over and over again, right? Once I've created a payment plan once, I can use it across the system, just the same way I can do that with my package templates, right? I can actually apply this payment plan to a proposal, right? If I wanted to have that proposal automatically apply the payment plan, just like I can easily add that payment plan to an invoice with one click and have everything be preset. To get a little bit more specific with these payment plans, since I think there's a couple more options that need some understanding here, right? I have some of these different options. You've got 3 installments, 50/50, fixed deposits, pay in full. Right? Those are just some example scenarios that you might have, but your payment plans might look entirely different. And that's totally okay. But to look at this 3 installments one, since this is the one we're going to be using today, I have a total of 3 installments, just as the title denotes. In this case, if I click into this particular installment here, I'm using a relative trigger to set this first due date, and then I'm using the same relative trigger with adding a month to the subsequent due dates. And as we can see over here on the right-hand side, I've got a lot of different ways that I can actually time out the due date of this installment. The important thing to note here as well that I think I glossed over is the fact that in Dubsado, you do need a payment plan of some variety in order to actually set a due date. You can, of course, have an invoice in Dubsado with no payment plan, and that's totally fine. Clients will still be able to pay it just like normal, but they won't actually see a due date on it unless you've used a payment plan to do so. And the good example of that is if I click out of this one real quick, pay in full here. It's just one installment, which means that whatever the grand total of this particular invoice is, they're still going to be asked to pay that full total. So using the example I mentioned earlier, where it's a $1,500 package, if I applied this pay in full payment plan, it's going to still ask them to pay $1,500. However, I will be able to set the due date. So I know that can be a little bit confusing for some folks because they think to themselves, well, the client is just paying all of it. Why do I need a payment plan? You really don't technically need one. However, if you want to use payment plans, or if you want to have a due date rather, you do need that payment plan, right? In this case, 0 days after payment plan applied to invoice means it's going to be due the same day that you add this payment plan to that particular invoice. What I was mentioning earlier, I think I lost my train of thought a little bit, is I can use these relative triggers to time out that due dates. So it's always going to be adjust to what's happening in real life, right? I can use project start and end dates to time that due dates. And I can also look at, like I said, after payment plan applied or after a contract is signed, which I think is a very, very common option in Dubsado. I wanted to make sure I noted that one in particular because many, many folks in Dubsado use that, right? If at some point during your process, you're going to be asking your clients to sign a contract, it totally makes sense to have a payment due, right beforehand, right after that contract gets signed. But the system will know when the client did sign it, and it will be able to set that due date appropriately, which is really, really cool. Jolana says that they do not pay by the due date. Can I be notified? Great question. We're going to get to the reminders right now, actually. So over here on the right-hand side, you might be seeing these reminders. And I did talk about this a little bit in my kind of laying out the agenda, right? On the payment plan, these reminders are for the client, right? So I can set up these automatic payment reminders to go out depending on the timing that I specify here. In this case, these 2 reminders are set up both for after the due date, right? So it'd be emailing my clients 2 days after the due date and 7 days after the due date. The really, really nifty thing about these payment plan reminders is that they do not send to the client if the client is paid before the reminder goes out. So in this case, if the client pays on time, or as soon as I send out this invoice that's due that day, they pay the invoice, then these 2 reminders don't get sent. It knows that the client actually paid the invoice and it will not send those reminders there. Now to Jolana's question about getting notified, there is some place on the dashboard that will tell you, hey, you've got overdue invoices, so you can follow up with them. However, Jolana, there's not going to be an email notification. So it's a good question to ask. There's not going to be something in the system that says, hey, so-and-so missed their payment. It would just be as simple as going to your dashboard. If I go over here, and you can see invoices that are overdue right here at the top of the page. If I click that, it will take you to any invoices that have overdue payments. So that'd be the easiest way to check to see if somebody missed their payment. Cool. Thank you, Joey, for getting to that one there. Perfect. Okay, fantastic. Sweet. Doubling back to our payment plans just for one more moment here. So like I said, we're going to be using the 3 installments payment plan today just for our examples here, but you could have any payment plan that you like. And the key really is that, like I said, if you have worked with the client before and you offered them some payment schedule and you made it manually, it probably makes sense even at that point, once you've done it one time, to save that as a payment plan template so you don't have to recreate it. The entire concept with our package templates and payment plan templates, just like any of our other templates in the system, is to prevent you from making everything manually every single time. We template it out once, and then we can use it very easily down the road. And we're going to be using that concept on our invoices. I'm not going to go too far into detail as far as the other settings of payment plans, but of course, I'm happy to answer questions if there are. Anne asks, is there a way to do a recurring email until the invoice is paid, more than just the 2 and 7 day reminder? Another great question, Anne. So as far as these payment reminders are concerned, and I was going to go a little bit more into detail on an actual invoice, I can add as many of these reminders on here as I want to. I could have 20 on there if I want to. However, there's not a setting that's going to just keep sending the email until they've paid, unfortunately. So it's only going to send the number that you do set up. But if I click into one installment here, for example, when I scroll to the bottom, under the reminders here, I can add as many different reminders as I want to. So I would say that at some point, your client hopefully will eventually pay. You could have 5 on here. I've seen very commonly folks have payment plans with 5 reminders, something like that, right? But to answer your question directly, and there's not going to be a setting on here that's going to just keep emailing them until they pay, right? I think at a certain point, if somebody's gotten 10 emails about something and they still haven't paid, that might be a moment where you do have to step in manually and say, hey, is there something going on here? But it's a great question now. Cool. And as Joey just mentioned here, I'll say it aloud for everybody as well. If you do ever have to step away during the course of this webinar, or you just want to watch the recording, don't fret. We are recording the session and you will automatically receive this recording as soon as the session is done, about an hour or two afterwards. Okay, cool. Fantastic. And Marissa, yes, all of our webinars are that way. Generally speaking, if you're attending a Dubsado webinar, it is being recorded. It will also be posted to our YouTube channel. So this webinar is being recorded. Next week's webinar will be recorded. Every webinar into the future, I plan on recording and we'll be posting to YouTube. So don't worry as well. And as well as if you even register, Marissa, you will receive the recording via email as well. Good question. Cool. Okay, folks. So like I said, there are more details as far as going into setting up a payment plan that I'm happy to discuss, but I want to move over into an invoice. And I think seeing some of these payment plan templates in action in the actual context of an invoice is probably going to be the best way to learn it. So let's jump over there. So let's just say to ourselves, hey, okay, we have some package templates and we have at least one payment plan template that I know I want to use. Let's go ahead and take a look at a project. So we go to the projects here. Now here I am on my projects page. It just has some dummy projects, right? Some sample projects, but we're going to work with Daniel today. Let's say that Daniel came into my system. He's a new lead and I need to make an invoice for Daniel. Isabella, I see you have your hand raised. If you had a question, please feel free to throw that in the chat, okay? All right. We're going to click into Daniel. Here we are in Daniel. It's a relatively blank, brand new project, but let's just say that I know that Daniel already needs an invoice created, or I want to maybe get ahead of my work a little bit, right? So we're going to go to the Invoices tab, and here I am on the Invoices tab with no existing invoices. So very simply, right, if I wanted to go ahead and start making an invoice, I would just say add to manually create a new invoice here. Now here I am with a blank invoice. And to kind of give you the lay of the land, right? We have our invoice number, which if I click into, I can actually set any invoice number that I like, and the system will automatically count up from whatever invoice number is the last one being used. So if 15 was the highest, the next one would be 16, for example. And this can be handy if you already have some presets, numbering conventions for your invoices. You can kind of match that up if you'd like to. But if I put in, a higher number, 300, for example, the next one would be 301, so long as there wasn't a higher number beyond that, just going to automatically count up. By default, the date will be the date that it was created, but of course I can pick any other date for this. And this is just an arbitrary date, right? This will just display in the top right corner of the actual invoice that we'll see in a little bit. But whatever date you want to have here is totally fine, or just leave it on the defaults of the day it was created. But here's the really part, the part that I really wanted to get to, which is we have a blank invoice. And I know that a lot of folks can get that sort of, blank page syndrome of like, oh man, I have to make this from scratch. But this is where I really wanted to talk about, hey, it's super easy. So we've made our package templates and we have our payment plan templates, and I can just go over here to the package dropdown to start adding value to this invoice. So if I click on the packages dropdown, this is a perfect recreation of that list we were just looking at in our package templates, right? I've got my starter, premier, and elite. I've got all my add-ons. I can easily add these packages to this invoice just with one click. So let's just say that I know that Daniel needs a starter package. So I'm gonna go ahead and say starter. And it's going to automatically throw in that line item. I didn't have to manually do anything other than just click packages and click that particular package to add it to this invoice. And it's that simple. I could do the same thing for any add-ons. If I wanted to add some add-ons in here, I can have as many different line items on one invoice as I want to. Now, let's say that Daniel is like, yeah, I do want to have a starter package, but maybe I agreed on a different price for Daniel for whatever reason, right? I can always make changes to this package now that it's in the invoice, and it's not going to affect my package template. And that's really the key here. Whenever you are in Dubsado and you are inside of a project, changes that you make to your templates will never affect your master templates for those items. That's true for packages, that's true for payment plans, that's true for forms, it's true for any kind of template. So we can make those client-specific changes without having to worry that we're going to affect the copy of the template that we pulled from, essentially, right? So like I said, I want to hammer this home because I have talked to many users in the past who are a little bit resistant to the idea of making packages because they know that they do client-specific changes every single time. I still think there's utility in adding some packages. And at that point, you can go, cool, okay, I know Daniel is doing a starter, but he has some changes. I can easily go over here on the right-hand side and click the drop-down arrow and say edit to make some custom edits to this particular line item for Daniel here, right? Maybe I need to add or subtract something from the description because there's a difference in scope for Daniel, right? Or more commonly, maybe the price is simply different. So I can always click on the price, and maybe for Daniel, it's $1,600, right? I could easily go ahead and save that change, and now I've just updated the price of that particular line item there. Marissa asks, you wouldn't add packages in the Invoices tab if you're sending a proposal that has invoice settings on it, right? I've actually set my clients to duplicate invoice line items. Marissa, you are ahead of the game. That's exactly what I was going to be getting to in just a little bit. but you're exactly correct. You're exactly correct. If we're using a proposal, we don't need to do any of what I'm showing you right here, but I do think there's value in actually understanding how to make an invoice manually, because then when we have the proposal do it down the road, you'll understand a little bit more what's happening on the back end as well. But Marissa, I'll show you exactly that concept in just a moment here. Christian asks, I use quote-like proposals, but always load from a template so I don't need to go and find each line item for my quotes. Yeah, no, exactly right. Christian, that's exactly perfect example of someone using packages in a slightly different way that still works so that can save you time. That's exactly right. That's fantastic. Cool. Earlier, Jennifer asks, can you add multiple reminders to an invoice you have already sent out? Yeah, so as long as the payment plan is still active, and by that sense, I mean there's still installments that haven't been paid, you should still be able to manipulate the on that payment plan. I will show you how to do that in just a little bit, essentially. Sorry, I was reading the question there. Evelyn asks, is the time tracker used much? Honestly, I don't see too many people using the time tracker, but there's definitely utility for someone that needs to track your time, and you can easily create invoice line items using that time tracker value to just throw it onto an invoice, essentially. But good question. Cool. All right, so now that we have our package on here and I showed you how to edit the package, I'm actually going to edit it back to $1,500 just because we're using a 3 installments payment plan, and it'll divide that up nicely into 3 installments. So cool, we have our package on here. We easily added it to this invoice, but now we need to think to ourselves, okay, cool. I know that Daniel doesn't actually want to pay $1,500 up front, so let's go ahead and add a payment plan so we can set those due dates, divide that payment into more than one installment, and have some automatic reminders on there, right? That's kind of the goal with our payment plans here. So I'm going to go down to this bottom portion, and I'm going to go ahead and select an existing payment plan. Of course, you could create a brand new payment plan, but this is kind of the area where I was mentioning, right? You can certainly create payment plans from scratch every single time if you like, but if you've done it once, don't make yourself do it more than once, right? Go ahead and just make it as a template, and we can easily add it into this invoice with one click, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say 3 installments, and it's going to throw that particular payment plan onto this invoice immediately. As we can see here, all my due dates already got set since I'm using the after payment plan applied to invoice trigger. And that's just one option, like I was mentioning, right? Your due dates can be set in a variety of ways. In this case, I just wanted to have active payment plan due dates, and that works for me on this case, right? So as we can see here, now I have 3 installments. It automatically broke up my total into $500 increments. And I can, of course, make edits to this payment plan just the same way that I did with my package, right? Let's say that Daniel was like, yeah, cool, 3 installments is fantastic, but I need some slight differences on the timing, right? Currently, my template goes from it, the first one's due immediately, right? 0 days. Then I have 1 month after, and then I have 2 months after. But Daniel's like, I know that money's gonna be a little bit tight in May. I wanna have a little bit extra time. And I'm like, fantastic, I can do that for you. So let's make a quick change. I'm gonna go ahead and say edit. And now again, I'm editing my payment plan template, and I'm not editing the master template. I'm editing this payment plan in the invoice, but I'm not changing my master template, right? So if I wanted to make a change to that last installment for Daniel, I could go ahead and click on the particular installment to open up these settings for this installment here. And now let's say Daniel was like, yeah, I don't think that 2 months is gonna be quite enough time for me to finish paying this off. So I want to add a little bit more time. So in this case, I could maybe give him 3 months instead, right? To give him an entire extra month, or maybe he just needs until the end of May. And if that was the case, I could do something like fixed, and I could just go ahead and pick the actual calendar dates on the calendar here. I'd go ahead and set it to May 31st, something like that, right? Anything that you like in there is totally fine. But again, making this sort of due date change is not going to affect my master template. Likewise, maybe Daniel wants the first installment to be worth more than subsequent installments. I can make the same sort of change to the amount due. In this case, I'm using the very simple divide equally option here, which is just going to take the grand total of my invoice and divide it amongst the installments equally. But of course, I could do something like a percentage to have a slightly more complex system where maybe I'm doing 60% up front, 20% and 20% afterwards, right? Whatever you like, you can totally do that too, just making sure that your percentages add up to 100. Or you could do something like fixed, which is really handy for folks who like to do something like, hey, I'm going to take a deposit and then I'm going to split the remainder up afterwards, right? You could do that first installment as maybe a fixed amount of $1,000, and then I could take the remaining $500 and divide it up however many times I want to. There's a ton of variability that you can do with your payment plans, but the key here, like I said, is that we can make these changes in the actual invoice. Right now we're in the project, and I'm not going to be changing my master template there. I'm going to leave those templates alone so that way I can use them over and over again and use them very quickly. Cool. We have a question here from Aaliyah. Is there a way to show paid or partially paid invoices, et cetera, for accounting purposes and to send it to an accountant at the end of every quarter? Yeah, Aaliyah, there would be a relatively quick way to do that. So if I go over to my reporting features over here and go to invoices, let's go ahead and quit without saving. I'll come back to that. Under reporting and under the invoices tab, you can very easily go to your filters and go to look at the status here and go and look for in progress, right? That would be for your, or if you want to look at paid as well, we can do paid too, right? At that point, it's just going to filter out every single invoice that has those statuses applied. And then you could easily download a CSV file and send that over to your accountant for them to look at the end of the quarter. Likewise, you can actually access a page very similar to this if I go to the dashboard and I go to click open invoices. If I click open invoices, that will by default filter for one extra filter in there, which we can easily remove. We have in progress, unpaid, and overdue, right? I'm not sure if you need the overdue as well, but you could easily get rid of the overdue, and there you go. So a couple clicks, you can get to that as well. And then you just have a CSV. Cool. Let's head back to the project real quick. Okay. All right. We have a bunch more questions here. Let's see if I have a moment to grab these. Yeah, Haley, Joey mentioned about recurring invoices. Exactly. Fantastic. Thank you, Joey. Haley asks if you're breaking it down into equal installments for like a photography payment, is it best to do like he's showing now or a recurring invoice? A recurring invoice, like Joey mentioned, Haley, is best for what I would call like a subscription model where it's just going to be every month until your client says stop, or maybe you just did it for, a fixed amount of time, but usually a good number of recurrences, right? If it's what I would consider a one-time service, like something like photography would be, you probably wouldn't necessarily need a recurring invoice for that, right? If it's a relatively large payment amounts, like, I don't know, $5,000, for example, right? That was the grand total. It's probably simpler to have the grand total of one invoice have $5,000. As at the bottom here, you can see total is $1,500, right? And then just break that down into however many installments that you need to. So more similar to the way I'm doing it here, as opposed to doing a recurring invoice. A recurring invoice is good for like, hey, every month I'm going to bill my client for the same amounts until they say stop, essentially, right? That would mean that that total that they've paid over the course of time could be varying, right, depending on how long the recurrence runs. If you know what the grand total is, you don't need a recurring invoice in most cases. Cool. All right. Victoria asks, can an invoice be edited after it was already sent to the client and the first 50% paid? Let's say there are new charges, extra expenses that occur during a project, and can I add them to the same invoice? The client can pay the additional charges as part of the remaining 50%, or would you recommend starting a new invoice? Fantastic questions, Victoria. Really, really good questions. So the answer is yes. You can certainly add value to an invoice after a payment has been recorded, in case, exactly like you mentioned, there are extra charges or extra services being offered, right? In this case, let's go ahead and mark a manual payment on this first $500 payment here, and we'll kind of mock that up real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and say apply. I'll say payments. In this case, we're just going to record a fake cash payment of $500. So let's say apply. So in this case, let's pretend that Daniel here has gone ahead and paid this first installment. And now at this point, Daniel's like, you know what? The starter package wasn't quite enough for what I need. I actually need some additional services. And at that point, right, maybe Daniel's like, I actually need to add on some website maintenance for down the road, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say, cool, I'll add in a package, which is going to be adding value to my invoice here. So now the grand total, if we look here at the bottom, right, is a total of $1,750, right? So I added value to this invoice, and this is taking that extra payment that the client already made into account. So the grand total now is a remainder of $1,250 remaining. So adding that value to the invoice automatically adjusts these payment plans in here. And that's only if I'm using this particular trigger here, not trigger, but the amount due for divide equally, right? Divide equally is always going to just look at whatever the total value of that invoice is, and it will readjust as needed if you add value to that invoice or even subtract value from the invoice as well. And that doesn't matter that the invoice is already in progress, essentially. At this point, the client would be able to access the same exact invoice link that they would have already received, and they can continue making payments with the updated amounts. But as you mentioned as well, the other alternative would be to start a secondary invoice, and you could, of course, do that too. It's really to your preference whether you want to be working off of just one invoice or you want to have multiple invoices. There's no wrong way to go about it. If you wanted to add a second invoice, we could go to the invoice list. From there, right, now I have the ability to add a second invoice, and I could go about that process that I just described, right, where we're adding a package, potentially adding a payment plan, doing that sort of thing there, right? So it's entirely to your preference whether you want to be working off of one invoice or multiple, but either one is totally fine. Let's go back into this invoice. I wanted to kind of clean up this invoice before we move on here real quick. And I'll actually note one more thing. As we were talking about with those payment reminders, right, we haven't talked about autopay as well. So if I go ahead and click into this invoice that's not paid, let's go ahead and say edit, and I'll click on the second installment here. Currently, we have one reminder set up to go out on the due dates, but of course, I can still add additional reminders. Let's say Daniel was like, you know what, I am kind of just scatterbrained. I need to be reminded, or as the business owner, you want to remind your clients. Totally fine either way. We can set up additional payment reminders right here in the payment plan, and we're not going to be affecting our master templates. Of course, you could just go ahead and go to your templates and set all this up there so you don't have to adjust it on the particular invoice. But the key that I'm hammering home is that we can always make changes to our particular client's invoices, and it's not going to affect our templates if you need to make those specific changes. The templates are there to save you time, but don't hesitate to make changes in the project if you need to. So let's go ahead and add in maybe one that's 3 days. I'll do after due date, right? And of course, I can set the time that I want this to go out as well. It defaults to 9 a.m., but I could pick any time of day if I want to. Then down here in this drop down rather, I can grab any canned email that I want to use for my reminder email, right? So let's go ahead and say past due for payment. We'll go ahead and say apply. At that point, now I can go ahead and click preview to actually see what that particular email is going to look like, right? That way I can make any adjustments to it if I need to, right? Which is really handy. So before they go out, you can see that preview, but I'll click into this installment to close it, and I'll go ahead and say save for an example here. Then a little bit of like housekeeping, I suppose. If I go ahead and look at my reminders, this green sent, it'll denote, hey, we already sent that particular reminder, but the ones that haven't been sent out, right, are going to be just this default black text. And then at that point, you can kind of easily keep track of which reminders have been sent or not sent, right? You can also go back into your emails tab to see if emails have been sent out as well. If you're a little bit confused on that, you can see that right away, since that was due immediately, it already sent my payment reminder out. It's something to keep an eye out if you're going to be using 0 days after payment plan applied to invoice, but in that case, it already sent out my reminder. Cool. All right. Leah asks, are recurring invoices doable with Dubsado? Yes, they definitely are. Like I said, we're not going to be talking too much about recurring invoices, but I'm happy to direct you to our chat. We'll be more than willing to walk you through how to set that up. The recurring invoices tab is right here, and the process is very simple as far as adding a particular package is concerned. However, there's a little bit more detail to go into how the payment plan should operate, and that's the part that our chat can help you out with. Oh, Joey, you beat me to it. Fantastic. I'm a little bit behind here on the chat. All right. Haley, hopefully what I just showed you a little bit ago will have answered your question already about how clients get reminded. It is just simply a reminder. I had that installments set up to send the reminder immediately, so I would have an example here, right? This is an example payment plan reminder right here. So, hey, Daniel, a friendly reminder that your $500 payment is due on today, essentially, right? Access your invoice here, and it defaults to using this invoice link. So if they click the invoice, it will take them straight to their invoice so they can go ahead and make a payment there. That's exactly how reminders work. They're all email-based. And then, yes, we are going to be discussing Klarna. We'll get to that in just a moment here. Let's see what else we got. On recurring invoice, is it possible to add an add-on for a single invoice / month in the series, or is a new single invoice for the additional service required? You're billing recurring monthly for the consulting, and then periodically you need to modify a single month to bill for an additional service provided. Really good question, Allison. In that case, you would be better off doing a separate invoice for that additional service. The recurring invoices, once you've created it and you've started the recurrence, you aren't able to actually edit that recurrence without stopping it, essentially. So of course you could stop the recurrence, update the installments or the payment total for that month, and then restart it. Then you'd have to stop it again to kind of put it back to normal. So you're better off having one series of recurring invoices going out for, say, $500 every month. And then if there's an additional fee that you need to have, in that case, since you already have the recurrence going, you just separately bill them for that additional fee there as well. Or maybe you have 2 separate recurrences going. That might be a little bit more complicated, but if it's a regular cadence of having an additional fee in there, maybe you have one recurrence that's sending out invoices every other month for your base amounts. And then on the odd months, you have the other recurrence going out for the bigger amount. That could be an option as well too. So you have 2 different recurrences happening. Haley said you have to set reminders so they won't be notified. So correct, Haley, right? The reminders are there for the client visibility so that they get that email saying, hey, you have a payment coming up. But of course, if I look at this invoice, if I'm a client, if I open this invoice here, I can see the due dates on this particular invoice as well. I can say this is due on the 12th, for example, right? So hopefully you have astute clients who will see, great, I know I have money due here, but those payment plan reminders are there to remind your clients, hey, that payment's coming up, right? Time flies. It's easy to forget that time's moving along and they maybe have a payment coming up they need to attend to. So those payment reminders are definitely good for alerting them they have an upcoming payment, as well as saying, hey, maybe you have a payment due today, or even that you missed a payment, right? All right, cool. Haley, so as far as recurring invoices are concerned, if you already have one set up with 13 installments, I'm going to go ahead and say that there's a slight change I'm going to make there. So every recurring invoice needs to have just one installment on it because they're meant to pay the grand total of that invoice each and every month. But as far as getting reminded is concerned, whenever a new invoice is created using a recurring invoice, it's going to go ahead and email the client with that new link. So they don't need to worry about setting up payment reminders for their recurring invoice since they're going to be getting a new payment link every single month if you're paying on a monthly basis, for example. Kimberly asks, how do we find out if the invoice is too old and no longer accessible? So the invoices are going to be always accessible. The client can at any time go and click that link. For example, right, I have this payment reminder right here in this email. The client accesses this email at any point in time. They should be able to click it. It will take them straight to that invoice. Even if you've closed the invoice, like maybe the client went and ghosted you for a little while, right? And you didn't hear back from them. If you close the invoice, they'll still be able to access that link. They just won't be able to make a payment on it in that case, but it's never going to be gone unless you actually delete the invoice. So in that case, right, you can just assume it's always going to be accessible via the link that you've already sent them. As far as actually following up with your clients, one way to do it would be to use those payment reminders to say, hey, you have a payment. If you're still planning to work with me, hopefully you're going to go ahead and pay me. But as far as actually reminding them about a proposal, you could do something like a reminder in a workflow or even a form expiration to go ahead and remind your clients about the proposal you sent them, which would be a good thing to do. And then Jolana asks, I've been adding to-dos and workflows to add your own reminders to ensure invoices and contracts are complete. Yeah, that's one way to do it for sure. You can definitely do something like that in a workflow to say, hey, a reminder for yourself to go ahead and say, hey, look and see if they've actually signed the contract and made the payments, and then you can follow up as needed. It's a really good point there, Jolana. Cool. All right, folks. Let's go ahead and jump back into the invoice. I want to talk about autopay. So in this particular payment plan, I already went ahead and set this to required, but I'm going to go ahead and say edit so we can look at this a little bit more specifically. If I click edit next to autopay, I have the ability to set this to disabled, right? So that they cannot enroll in autopay. I can set it to optional, meaning that the client could opt into autopay if they want to, or required would be when they make a payment, they have to enroll in autopay. Those are the three options. And right now I'm controlling this on a payment plan level. It's just for this one payment plan that I'm adjusting it here. And you might notice here at the bottom, right, reset to brand settings. So something that can be a little bit confusing is you have a global auto pay setting that we can look at and we can adjust it as needed. So if you're somebody who's like, you know what, I want all my clients to always be on auto pay, we can set that up and go to settings here. And let's take a look at our payments and invoices tab here. And I can see down here, default auto pay setting. My current setting is set to optional. In any payment plan, I can set that particular payment plan to always be one of those three options, right? So it can differ from my global setting, but if I don't ever play with it in that payment plan template, it will default to your global setting here. In this case, it's optional. Now, it's entirely up to you how you want to go ahead and set this up, right? Maybe some folks always want to have auto pay required, or maybe some folks want to give your clients the ability to opt into auto pay, but not always, right? That'd be a good option for optional. And then disabled would be you never want your clients to opt into auto pay. Really, whatever your preference there is totally fine. The key here is understanding the requirements that an invoice must meet in order for auto pay to be allowable, essentially, right? So if I go back to this particular invoice for Daniel here, there are a couple of different requirements that the particular invoice needs to meet, like I mentioned here. Let me go ahead and find my notes here real quick. Right, okay, so first and foremost, right, you need to be using either Dubsado payments or Square in order for this to work. If you're only using PayPal, you will not be able to have autopay on your particular invoice, right? The client needs to be able to make those payments on a regular cadence, and it's required to have Dubsado payments connected for either card or ACH, or Square will do just card payments, right? So that's kind of the base table stakes, is making sure that you're connected with the right payment processor. Beyond that, though, your invoice needs to have more or two or more installments, right? If it's a singular installment, if we were to pretend for a moment it was just a $500 invoice, there's no need for autopay because the client's only making one payment, right? We need to make sure that the actual invoice has more than one installment on it, so that way the client can pay once and then be automatically billed for the second one. And that's an important point to note as well, is that you cannot, as the business owner, opt your client into autopay. The client must actually elect to do so on their end of things, and we'll actually look at that on the invoice. When the client goes to make their first payment on a required payment plan with autopay, they'll be notified, hey, you're making one payment right now, subsequent payments will be automatically deducted from your account because autopay is enabled and you have to opt into it when you make that payment. So you cannot do it for your clients. And as well, your client can always turn autopay off if they wish, but they can always change their card type as well, right? If they need to change their actual payment method, which is nifty. So there's that piece as well. The last thing as well is that your due dates must not be set to TBD. As you notice here, right, I have actual dates set for all these due dates. In this case, that was today. I've got April 12th and I've got May 12th. Those are real dates that are going to occur in the future. If I have TBD listed for any of these due dates, the autopay will not be able to be turned on essentially because the system won't know when to try to bill them essentially, right? The situations where that occurs, if I go ahead and click edit here, let's say that this second installment was set to not 1 month after payment plan applied, but maybe it was 1 month after the contract was signed, right? That's a very common thing that I see here in Dubsado. As you can see, now that I've changed that trigger, 1 month after the contract is signed, that's totally fine to use. That's great. But in this particular project, I don't even have a contract applied. I haven't sent a contract to my client, which means that the system doesn't know when this date is, right? If I sent the client the contract today, right, and then the client signed, then the system knows, okay, great, what's 1 month after the day the client signed the contract? And it can fill in blank on that particular TBD date, right? So if your dates don't have actual dates listed, the client will not be able to enroll in autopay. And that's an important point to note. I see that semi-frequently looking at folks' invoices in Dubsado. They're like, man, my client was supposed to enroll in autopay. What happened? If you're using any of these relative triggers, you got to make sure that the actual condition is being satisfied. So the same would be true for project start and end dates, right? I can certainly time payments off of my start and end dates, which is totally fine, but I need to make sure I actually have a project date set. In this case, in this particular project, I do have one set, right? So March 31st, or sorry, May 31st rather. In that case, I could totally go ahead and use those before or after project end dates, and it would fill in that date for me because it can pick the actual date that would be. If I didn't have a project date set, that date is still TBD essentially. Cool. The last thing about particular autopay is that there can be no more than one payment that's overdue. So if your client is severely late on their payments, you can't have them make one payment and then opt into autopay for all the rest of them because there's a backlog of payments that would need to get processed. So you may have to actually play with the due dates on your installments if you're in a case like that. Make sure that no more than one installment is overdue. Any questions on autopay, folks? Because I know that I get a lot of questions about that as well, and we will look at it on the invoice in just a moment here. All good, folks. Thank you for adding that, Joey. Appreciate it. Okay, let's move on. So now that we've kind of walked through and played around with this particular invoice, I do want to take a brief moment to show you how we can automate a lot of this process using a proposal. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete all the work we just did. Since it was just an example, we will go ahead and quit without saving. We're going to start fresh. So now here I am on the invoice list. I'm just going to delete this particular invoice and we'll start over. So, sorry, I added a payment on there. Get rid of that payment. Anybody who's tried to delete a project probably just saw what you've probably just felt me there. We were like, man, I've tried to delete a project. I had an invoice of the payments. Got to make sure we delete those payments and delete the invoices before you can delete a project. Cool. Okay, so now we have a blank project again, right? No invoices here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Forms tab and I'm going to add a proposal. But I want to kind of highlight this page right here. I currently have 0 invoices in this project, and that's important. If I go and add a proposal to this particular project, the proposal will automatically open a new invoice for me, and that's by design. The proposals and invoices are linked interchangeably, not interchangeably, but intrinsically, because the proposal is going to be helping us build that invoice. So if I go ahead and say add a new form, and I go ahead and say the 3Dubs design proposal, I'm going to go ahead and add this to the project. And as soon as I do, it's actually going to open that new invoice for me, and it's just going to be waiting in the wings blank. So I'm going to go ahead and close this preview real quick. Now I've got my proposal in here and I've got my contract. If I go back to the invoices tab, suddenly I have a blank invoice. As we can see, my particular proposal is set up so that it automatically applies a payment plan. And now it's just waiting for the clients to go ahead and select a particular package. So we've done half our work already for us just by adding a proposal. If you have a payment plan that you're using all the time, we can have that payment plan set up in our proposal settings, and it's going to go ahead and automatically add that payment plan to our invoice. Now, a lot of folks I've seen get confused, right? Where, hey, this is just a blank invoice, so I must need to go ahead and add some value in here. Somebody in the chat mentioned this earlier, right? Don't make that mistake. This is supposed to be blank because we're waiting for the clients to make their selections. So if I was the client and I received this particular proposal, I can go ahead and say view, and let's just pretend that I emailed this to the clients. I'll say copy link. I'm going to open this in a different browser, so that way it will think that I am the client. Go ahead and open this up. If I'm the client, I can go ahead and say, cool, I just received this proposal from this business that I'm working with. Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, I do want to do the starter plan. I'll select that one. And now I'm going to go ahead and go down and say submit next. As soon as I submit those package selections, it's going to take that package that I picked and it's going to add it to my invoice. In this case, I already have a contract on here as well, which is cool. I can have my client sign for it immediately. And again, that's just an additional option. You don't have to include a contract if you don't want to, but it's just showing you some additional functionality here. I'll go ahead and sign this real quick. And then we'll go ahead and say agree and submit. And just like that, now we are here on our invoice and we have this brand new invoice that just got created. If I go back into Dubsado real quickly and I refresh the page, we can see those changes take effect in the project as well. Go back into invoices, and here we are. So now we're kind of back to the beginning, right? I'm already back to the place that I took some time making manually, right? I added this particular starter package manually, and I added the payment plan manually. Now that I've used a proposal, all that's done for me. All I did as the business owner is I sent my client my proposal, and this happened automatically. I let my client select the packages, and I already have the correct package on this invoice, and I already have the correct payment plan on this invoice, which is why, again, right, it makes a lot of sense to have those things templated out. Having your package allows you to add it to your proposal. Templating out your payment plans means that I don't really need to come back in here and make any adjustments to this. This is already correct if this was the payment plan that I wanted to use and I set that up in my proposal. So hopefully that's a really quick demonstration of how much time you can save from actually making things manually if you do want to use proposals. Now, of course, you don't have to use proposals. This is not going to be for everybody because not everyone has a system where they send out things to their clients, let them pick. It's going to be specific to your business, but it is a very handy dandy way to do this very, very quickly. Got some more questions in here. Christian says you need a nuclear delete option. Maybe, Christian, that might be good, but I can see folks running into issues with that too. Aaliyah asked, are there good proposal templates like in this example? We're currently working on making some better proposal templates for y'all, but there are, of course, existing proposal templates in your form templates library. If you wanted to go ahead and take a look at those, there are free templates you can use and add into your accounts. They're not exactly the same as the one that I just showed you, but they are pretty good. I definitely recommend that. Can we add a video of me talking with the potential clients added to the proposal, custom quotes? They can watch the video. Yeah, totally, Kimberly. So there is a way to embed a video element on your proposal. You can check out our help center to see how you can go ahead and add video there, but that's certainly a possibility. Joey, you're like way ahead of me. I'm sorry, man. I'm like, I need to keep scrolling down on the chat because you're too fast. You're way faster than I am. Thank you, Joey. How do you connect the proposal and contracts to the invoice? Yeah, great question. I'll show you that too. I think I meant to show you that in the first one there. I can't actually edit this proposal since I've already completed it. We'll just add it one more time again. So if I was to say I'm a business owner and I'm going to take a look at some of the settings, we'll go ahead and say we're adding this proposal. I'll say add. At this point, if I go ahead and click edit, I can look at this particular proposal's settings. So over here on the left-hand side, we'll go to form settings. If I click on that gear icon, then I have the ability to see this include contract option and include invoice option. Now, both of those are entirely optional things. You do not have to include them. But like Aaliyah was mentioning, like if you want to include those things, so it's one flow from left to right, you can turn those things on. If I turn that contract option on, it will normally ask me to pick a contract. In this case, there's already one there, which is why it's saying add one on the project. And then the same thing is true for the invoice, right? If I turn the invoice option on, it will show the invoice. Now, if I had this turned off, it still does exactly the same thing I was just showing you. It will still create the invoice, it will add their package selections to it, and it will add any payment plans that you have set up as well. It will do that no matter what. The include invoice option here that I'm highlighting, that simply controls whether or not the client sees the invoice in that flow. The invoice is still getting created, it will still be there in Dubsado, and it will still have everything that they selected on there, right? That's something that I like to hammer home as well, because I have seen folks think, oh, if I turn this off, then it doesn't create the invoice. That's not correct. The proposal will always either create a new invoice if one does not exist, or it will take the existing invoice in the project and it will add the package selections to that primary invoice. So like I said, this is simply a visibility toggle, essentially. It's going to say, am I going to show my client the invoice straight away, or am I not going to show them the invoice straight away? That's all it's controlling. Great question earlier. All right, let's back out a step here. And I want to go ahead and take some time to talk about the actual invoice itself. I'm going to delete this real quick. Let's go back to the invoices tab here. Okay, so now that we have our invoice, whether you've made it manually or you've sent it, you've created it via proposal you sent out, right? Let's say that you need to actually send an email, right? Send a one-off email. we can go ahead and say send. I can say it via email, and it's going to go ahead and just pop open this email composition window, and I can go ahead and email this to my client straight away, right? Of course, I can edit this email if I want to. I could grab any other canned email to use if I want to grab a different canned email. Either way is totally fine. By default, the invoice link will be in here, but I can always add one in here by going to Smart Fields, link. I can go ahead and throw in an invoice link if one's not in that email, right? It's very easy to email it to my clients if I want to. Of course, if you're using a proposal and you have that invoice option included, it may not be necessary to send it via email. But of course, maybe you want to preview what your invoice looks like to your clients. I showed you by clicking in an email link, but I can actually go to send, and I can say open a new window to actually look at this invoice as though it was the client's. This is the same exact link the client will get. So what I'm looking at right here is exactly what the client will see. It's not like close to what the client will see. It is precisely what the client will see. Now here I am on my actual invoice that we have created here for Daniel Edwards, right? I've got my starter package and I've got my payment plan. I have all my due dates listed out, and I've got a bunch of pay now buttons here, right? So there's gonna be a pay now button for every installment that you have set up in that particular payment plan. And we can start as though we were the client. I can say pay now on one of these installments here. So I'm connected with Dubsado Payments, and we have a bunch of different options that we can choose from as far as how we can actually go ahead and make a payment here. The first option being card, obviously, right? But of course, I can go ahead and choose to pay with my bank if I want to as well, since I have the ACH option enabled. Now, bear in mind that Square does not have the ACH option. So if you want to give your clients the ability to pay via bank, you do need to be connected with Dubsado Payments. And bank transfers can be really handy because the processing fee is so much lower, capped at $5, right? As opposed to card payments. And we're talking about payment transaction fees. That's something that I really want to talk about as far as surcharging is concerned, right? Surcharging in Dubsado is a compliance solution that we've created to help business owners offset some of the costs of those processing fees, right? This by default is adding a 3% surcharge to my particular credit card transactions. And that's the one thing I wanted to make sure I hammer home as well, is that the surcharging amount is only added if the client chooses to pay with a credit card. So since I have surcharging enabled, right, it's going to say here at the top, hey, we've got $500 plus our $15 credit card surcharge. That will only be true if I end up typing in an actual credit card into this area here. If I put in a debit card, the system will not add that surcharge, since federally, debit cards cannot be surcharged, just like bank transfers cannot be surcharged, right? So right now we have $500 plus $15 for that surcharge. It's assuming I'm going to pay with a credit card. It will still know if I put in a debit card here, it will remove the surcharge, which is really, really handy. So you don't actually have to worry about, knowing if your client's going to pay with a certain card or not, right? As soon as I click on bank account right here, it's going to remove that surcharge. Now we're back to $500, right? So the system knows what kind of payment they're going to be making. And like I said, that surcharging option is really, really nifty because we know that the payment processing fees can be pretty, onerous, and they are cutting into your profits that are hard won as a business owner. So if you're someone that wants to recoup some of these particular payment transaction fees, I'd encourage you to use surcharging if it's available in your area. It's currently only available in the US and Canada, with the exception of a couple of different states. Those would be Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New York, and then the area of Puerto Rico, right? So Puerto Rico cannot do it as well, but certain states have more specific laws and regulations around surcharging, so they're not allowable in those areas, at least via Dubsado Payments. But if you live in the US and Canada and any other places, you should be able to turn surcharging on. Lee asks, how do we add the bank transfer option? That is just a default setting in your Dubsado Payments settings over here. If I go back into Dubsado real quick, if I go up to the settings icon at the top of the page, and then I go to payments and invoices, I can go ahead and toggle on ACH payments right here. Like I mentioned before, okay, yeah, definitely. So if you're in the UK, exactly. ACH being just US only bank transfers. Exactly correct. Good question. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, that's the wrong invoice. Get rid of that one. Oop. Little sneak peek of tap to pay. We'll get back to that in just a second here. So any other questions about surcharging, I'm happy to answer them here. But the key here is that it's just going to be a compliant solution, something that you don't need to worry about setting up correctly. As long as you've gone through the onboarding on Dubsado end of things and you've enabled it, so you don't need to worry about what card they're paying with. You don't need to worry about accidentally surcharging in the situation where you shouldn't surcharge. And it will help you save more of your hard-earned cash. That's really the key here. And it works. It just works. It's very simple. And great question, Johnny. Yes, correct. Cool. We had a question from earlier from Pam. Could you add a fee to the invoice? Like when using PayPal, there's a fee I add on for the clients to take versus me. Great question, Pam. So part of what you're referencing here is sort of similar to what folks would want to do with what you're saying, right? Where like in certain scenarios, you're adding a fee because it's trying to offset some of your costs. Surcharging might be a better solution for you instead of doing something like that. In Dubsado, you could certainly add in an additional line item fee if you wanted to, but at that point in time when you're building the invoice, you don't know for a fact what payment method they're going to be using, right? So it's not a perfect solution. Using something like surcharging means that you're always going to collect that fee if they pay with credit card, for example, right? So I would encourage you to look more into surcharging instead of doing a manual fee on your invoices. Amanda asks, can people pay you via QuickBooks/Zelle in Dubsado? Yeah, so if people are accepting, or if you are accepting payments via something that's not via Dubsado payments like QuickBooks or Zelle, you certainly can manually record that transaction. If you recall earlier, I manually recorded a cash payment. You would just do exactly the same thing on the invoice. You would say apply on the invoice. Let's go back to that particular project. Just clicked on the wrong project. Sorry, folks. Back to jobs, back to Daniel. You would go ahead and click apply and then say payments, and you could easily record that payment here. Under the methodology, you could type in whatever, whatever way you accepted that payment. If it was Zelle or QuickBooks, you could type it into that payment description right here and record that amount as well. Cool. All right, so talked about surcharging. We are gonna kind of look at autopay real quick. Let's just say I was the client and I did want to go ahead and make a payment here using a credit card. Oops, not 24, let's do something like 30. I'm just putting in a test card here. So one other thing I want to mention as well is we do have what's called Link, which is a Stripe product. It's something that you might see a little bit more commonly nowadays. I see it popping up all over the place. Essentially, Link is a Stripe product that businesses can integrate with their payment solutions, and it will allow clients to save their payment details into their Link account. And once they've done so, they can easily add in their payment methods with one click, right? So I haven't set it up for this pretend client just yet, and I won't do so. But if your client had a real Link account and they already had information saved into it, they could easily say with one click, hey, I want to pay with this card. It works very similarly to something like autofill with your browser where it automatically has your card saved. It's kind of very similar to that. It's just not browser specific, but it's very handy dandy if your clients are already using Link with other businesses, which they very well might. There are millions of folks who are already in Link and probably don't even realize it since it's in so many different places. So if you want to have Link enabled, fantastic. You can let your clients pay more easily that way too. I'm going to disable this for the time being, and I want to say review payment. This is the payment page that I wanted to get to as far as the autopay enrollment is concerned, kind of doubling back to that concept about autopay. Since autopay is required on this particular invoice, as soon as I make this payment, it's notifying me, hey, we're going to charge you this first installment amount, which is that $500 plus the 3% surcharge. And then we're going to keep automatically charging you until the total of $1,500 is paid. So like I said, this is just that last piece that your clients will see when they are enrolling in autopay. I want to make sure that the business owners end of things, you all can see that because your clients will be seeing it as well. It's good to know where they're going to be understanding and seeing autopay pop up. Cool. All right. A couple more questions in here. Yeah, as Joey mentioned. So Dana asks, can you have essentially Dubsado payments and Square enabled? And that's a good question. You can only have one of the two connected, right? Either Dubsado payments or Square. You can always have PayPal connected. PayPal kind of is off on its own island over here, and you can have PayPal connected all the time, no matter what, whether you have Square connected or Dubsado payments connected. PayPal is just an additional option if you wanted to have that on there too. Good question. So now we're at the top of the hour here. We're not going to go for too much longer. I'm going to talk a little bit about Affirm and Klarna, and then we're going to go into our tap to pay beta. We'll probably go about 10 to 15 minutes over if anybody wants to stick around. Okay, cool. All right, so Affirm and Klarna are buy now, pay later options. These are relatively new features, pretty brand new, that I'm really excited to talk a little bit about. And as you can see right here at the bottom of this particular invoice, it's already telling me, since I have Affirm and Klarna enabled, that I can pay this particular invoice, this $1,500 invoice, for as low as $77 a month. And your clients will be going, man, that's pretty low for interest-free. That's fantastic, right? The way that your clients can access those payment options is if I click this bottommost pay now button here. Since this bottommost pay now button is always trying to pay the grand total of this particular invoice. If I click pay now, it's pulling up, hey, this is the grand total, right? $1,545 there. And I now have the ability to say Affirm or Klarna, right? If I click on either of these options here, it's going to default to showing me some base offers, but of course I can always click learn more to go ahead and get a bit more information about my particular offers, as well as if I click Affirm and I say pay $1,500, it's going to redirect me to Affirm sites because the offers that I receive as a client are specific to my financial situation, right? If they're already using Affirm, for example, if they have some payment history built up, Affirm will probably offer them better offers, right? It's also going to be credit dependent, and there's some other features and specifics that go into determining the offers your clients will see, but it is on Affirm's end of things. The whole idea with Affirm and Klarna, and the reason that it's something we wanted to add in here, is it's really, really nifty for increasing your cash flow as a business owner. Keep in mind, the client is going to be paying the grand total of this particular invoice, right? That means you get the entire invoice amount up front without having to wait 2 or 3 months, right? Minus any transaction fees. So you're going to get all that money up front, and then the client will be paying their installments to Affirm or Klarna, whichever one they choose, and making those installments to them, right? So from a cash flow perspective, fantastic, because you can take a very large invoice payment and have your clients go use Affirm or Klarna. They can have the installments that they wish to choose. It gives them a lot of flexibility as far as how many times they're making payments and for any interest, right, for example. And then you get all that money straight away. So I really, really think Affirm and Klarna can be a nifty option if you're someone that wants to improve your cash flow. It can be really great to offer to your clients if there's someone that's already using Affirm and Klarna. It's very, very popular these days, especially with some of the younger generation being like, yeah, hey, you know what? I can do interest-free payments for payments. Great, easy. I'll do that, right? A lot of folks are already making use of this. And so we wanted to make sure that we kind of stay with the times and add these particular options to our payment plan, to our invoices rather. And it just gives you an additional way to accept money, which is really, really cool. Any other questions about Affirm and Klarna? I'm happy to talk about them, but these are something they're easy to miss there at the bottom of the invoice. And I think the last thing that I'll mention is the easiest way for your clients to always pay with Affirm and Klarna is actually to not use a payment plan, right? If I only have the package on here, the $1,500 package, and I don't have a payment plan, the only pay now button they'll see is that bottom-most pay now button, right? It'll be moved up a little bit, but they'll be asked to pay the grand total. When I click pay now, that's when I see those Affirm and Klarna options here. If I'm trying to make an installment payment as one of these $500 payments, I don't see those options because I'm not saying, hey, I want to pay the grand total. That's just one portion of this particular invoice. So the client will need to elect to pay the grand total to see those payment options. And if you're someone that wants to encourage your clients to use Affirm or Klarna, you might mention that at some point in your process and say, hey, I do offer Affirm and Klarna payments. You'll have a variety of different installments to choose from. And I'm going to go ahead and send your invoice over that way. Click to pay the full installment, and you can always choose the number of installments you want to pay and I know over how much time, essentially. Jolana says, our clients have a difficult time getting their credit cards to work on the third-party payment method, but same credit card on the same day works on Stripe. Jolana, I'm so sorry that I wouldn't be able to know a bit more about that offhand here, but I do encourage you to reach out to our chat, hello@Dubsado, or use that green bubble in your account to take a look at that. I'm not quite sure what you meant by third-party payment methods, but we would love to look at it with you. Matia says, for some reason, for my payments and invoices section, I'm not able to toggle the accept Klarna, even though Italy is included in the list of countries that accept Klarna. Same thing, Matia. I wouldn't know offhand why that would be occurring. It might have something to do with where your business is registered, for example. Klarna has a pretty wide-ranging list of countries that it does accept users from, as well as your business categories. So what kind of business you're running. Again, they have a very, generous number of business categories that they do support, but it could be that your business, for whatever reason, is not acceptable for Klarna. Definitely reach out to our chat support so we can take a look at it. Okay, cool. Kimberly asks, can a person pay with Affirm and Klarna if the invoice we send out is not on a payment plan? I don't offer payment plans right now. Yeah, Kimberly, that's exactly what I was mentioning. That's actually maybe potentially more of the ideal scenario if you don't have a payment plan. In that case, the only pay now button they'll see is the one that will show them Affirm and Klarna. So totally fine, Kimberly. If you don't have payment plans, you're right at home. Perfect. Enable Affirm and Klarna, and they will see those options on there. Okay, cool. And just to review one more time, I was already there a little bit ago, but if you're someone that wants to take a look at some of these payment options, if I go up to my settings here, and I go over to my payments and invoicing page, this is where I can turn on all these different payment options like ACH, obviously credit card payments, Affirm, Klarna, and surcharging. Cool. All right. So I know we're a little bit over time here, but let's talk about Tap to Pay, folks, because it's our brand new feature. I'm so excited to demo it for y'all today. Oops, yeah, I do want to allow Zoom. There we go. Cool. We can go ahead and close this invoice for the time being. So to start out with Tap to Pay, I think the best way to kind of get everyone's feet wet with Tap to Pay is to show you this really fun video that Becca and Biz created for us today, because there's one little thing that I can't show you directly on the screen share, since Dubsado payments and Tap to Pay will have the ability to accept a debit card payment, right? Where it's inputting the PIN, and we can't actually show that on screen. So Apple doesn't let me screen share that. But I wanted to show you this video because it's a video of a screen, so you can kind of see a demo payment. Cool. No worries, Christian. Thank you for being here. Fantastic. All right, cool. So here's Tap to Pay. Let's take a look. So we're entering in the invoice information, say accept the payments. There we go. So that one's a digital wallet, right? Hopefully it's not too loud, y'all. Hear me? We can take digital wallet payments. We have tap to pay, right? Many credit cards have tap to pay already enabled in them. I've been using it on a day-to-day basis, and even your Apple Watch. And it's that simple. It's so satisfying when your phone buzzes. It's fantastic. I love it when your phone's like, yep, you got the payment. It's really, really fun. Like I was saying at the top, we've been around the office like taking $1 payments from each other just to see it. It's really, really fun to use. So obviously, if you're somebody that has clients that they meet in person, it's really, really cool to be able to say, yeah, hey, I'm right here. I can take that payment right now. You don't have to send them a link. You can have them just pull out their card, pull out their payment method, pull out your phone, right? If you have the Dubsado mobile app, and accept that payment right on your phone. Super easy, super easy. Not worrying about due dates, not worrying about payment plan reminders. You're right there in person. You may as well take that payment right then and there. So it really gives you that flexibility and power to do that, right? To accept that payment immediately. So what I'm going to do is I already have my phone shared. Let's see. Let's go ahead and resume. Cool. Fantastic. All right, so here I am in the Dubsado mobile app. Hopefully everyone can see that. Let me know if you cannot see that. Joe, can you see that okay? Let me know. Thank you, Joey. Perfect. So here we are on the Dubsado mobile app. When you first log into the mobile app, if you have not set up tap to pay just yet and you're in a brand that you own, you will be prompted right here on the homepage to go ahead and set up tap to pay. But if you maybe close out of that pop-up or you haven't done so yet, we can always go to the More tab here. And then from there, we can go to our tap to pay settings. Now I've already enabled this, but all you need to do is turn this toggle on and it will prompt you to essentially finish the setup, which if you're an iPhone user, you'll be agreeing to the tap to pay terms and services. Terms of services agreement, you'll accept that, and then you'll go ahead and confirm your business address. This business address is looking at the business address you have in Stripe, and you may just need to go ahead and edit it or confirm it, making sure it's being pulled in correctly. Now, once you have tap to pay enabled, there's a variety of ways you can actually get to accepting a tap to pay payment, and that's what I wanted to show you here today. So if I go back to the main projects page, this is option 1, right? Let's just say that you have a client in front of you and you're like, cool, I need to take a payment. If you already have a project in Dubsado for that client and an invoice, we can go ahead and say plus, and I can go ahead and say tap to pay on iPhone payments. At that point, you could go ahead and pick the project, right? Let's say I was with Marcus in person, right? I'm gonna go to Marcus's project. From there, I know I have a $500 balance that's due. I can go ahead and say, great, that's the one I wanna pick. I'm gonna say continue to payment options. But of course here, right, I could pick any other project. Again, if I picked the wrong project, that's totally fine. Maybe Marcus has a different invoice and I actually need to pick a different invoice. I can do that as well, right? I'm just specifying the project and specifying the invoice. From there, I'll say continue to payment options. Now here we can see that tap to pay does allow us to have a surcharging fee added, right? Since I have surcharging enabled in my accounts, it's still being applied here, which is great. In this case, it's just asking me to specify if my client is paying with a credit or debit card. This is the slight difference between web version or mobile app, right? Since you're in person with your client, you can easily ask them, hey, is this a debit or a credit card? And this is important, right? Specifically for surcharging, right? If my client tries to pay with a debit card, but I have credit selected, it won't actually allow that transaction to go through. And likewise, right, it's important to note if you picked debit, but the client uses a credit card, it will still not allow that transaction to go through. That's probably the more common one, right, where some folks are running their debit card as a credit card. That's totally fine if people do that. Just make sure you actually confirm what kind of card it is. And if it does pop up and say, hey, it didn't work, you can always just go back and try it again. No problems there. So go ahead and say tap to pay. And at this point, we get preparing payments, and that's when the client would go ahead and actually offer their payment method and tap their phone there, right? Like I said, it's not going to allow me to mirror that because hypothetically, if it was a debit card and they needed to enter their PIN, they could do it there, and that's secure information. So that's option 1. If you were like, okay, cool, I didn't actually remember I could click the plus icon, maybe you're already in their project in the actual Dubsado mobile app. So if I go ahead and say, cool, let's go to the project, go to the jobs. Here's Marcus Cooper once again. Now from this projects page, right, I'm inside the project, I can go to the invoices tab. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and click on his invoice. Now that I'm looking at the invoice, I can go ahead and say that top right corner, those 3 dots, and say tap to pay iPhone payment. Takes me back to the exact same page. Now, the last way we can get there is if I go all the way back to the main projects page, just to kind of start fresh, I can go to the More tab. And this is another new feature of ours, is along with Tap to Pay, we did add in the invoice list. And this closely mirrors the reporting and invoices section, right? Where it's just going to give you a full list of all your invoices. But likewise, I can go to the invoice list. I can go ahead and find Marcus's, that's an issue on the my end of things. I screwed something up there, but we can go to the invoice list and we can go ahead and pick the invoice from there and then accept that tap to pay payment once we get to the invoice the same way. We have some questions in here. Cool. Do we foresee tap-to-pay payments using Square? Currently speaking, no, I would say not so. Since Dubsado Payments is sort of our main payment processor, we're adding that new functionality to Dubsado Payments for the time being. So I wouldn't say we're planning on adding tap-to-pay to Square, but good question. That's essentially everything that I wanted to talk about here, folks. I know we had a lot of questions throughout, but any other questions before we hop off here? I know we're a little bit over time, but I appreciate everyone being here with me today. All the great questions. Jelana, thank you so much for being here too. I appreciate the kind words there. Evelyn asks, does the business owner need an Affirm or Klarna account for, or just the clients? Great question. It should be just the client. It should have nothing to do with your standing with Affirm or Klarna or your account or not an account with Affirm or Klarna. It's just going to be on the client's end of things. And if the client doesn't have an account, they should be able to basically create one very quickly through that process when they go ahead and head over to Klarna or Affirm. Well, thank you all for the kind words. I appreciate it, folks. Thank you, everybody. That's very kind of you guys. Fantastic. Keep in mind that this webinar is, like I said, recorded. You will receive the replay in just about an hour or two, and then you can also always find it on YouTube. But I appreciate y'all sticking with me. I know that was a lot of content to get through, but it's always something I love talking about because getting paid is a big part of running a small business. And we want to make sure that here at Dubsado that you are getting paid as easily as possible and, take home that hard-earned cash. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Oh, Haley wanted a quick clarifying question. So if we don't need an Affirm or Klarna account, how do we get the money? So as far as I'm concerned, the client is the one that's setting up the Affirm or Klarna accounts, and then they're going to be essentially with our integration, they're paying you directly. So that invoice that they pay will still show up in Dubsado the same way as if they paid with credit card or not, right? So they're just sending us the money essentially when they make that payments. But to my knowledge, you don't need to have an Affirm or Klarna accounts on your end of things. We've handled that directly with our integration. So you should still see that money come in just the same way. Essentially, it's handled through Stripe, is my understanding. So you should still be able to go into your Dubsado Payment Stripe accounts, see that transaction was recorded. It's going to be end up in your Stripe account, essentially, if a client pays via Affirm or Klarna. Hopefully that makes sense, Haley. Of course, you can have an Affirm or Klarna account if you're using Affirm or Klarna yourself in your day-to-day life, but you shouldn't need to have that existing in order to do that. All you need is a Dubsado Payments account. Cool. Any other questions, folks? All good? All right. I think we'll go ahead and call it there. Thank you everyone again for being here today. I really appreciate everyone's time, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.